My name is Viraj Pattni, and I am a senior intelligence analyst for Africa at Intelligence Fusion, and I'll be talking about developments in Libya. So the situation in Libya has fluctuated pretty dramatically at times after the fall of the Gaddafi regime. So after the fall of the Gaddafi regime, a civil war broke out involving hundreds of armed groups, and you could place each of these armed groups in different sort of sections of the political spectrum. So some were more moderate, but others leaned more towards the Islamist and Salafist strand. So essentially, we've seen the country split into two, into Western Libya and Eastern Libya. And rival governments and rival institutions have been set up in both sides. In Eastern Libya, the dominant armed group is the Libyan National Army, and it's led by Khalifa Haftar. Internationally, it's backed by Egypt, the UAE, and Russia, including Russian mercenaries. And in the West, where the UN-backed or UN-recognized government has been based, things have been a bit more complicated. It's been supported by the likes of Turkey and Qatar. Things are a bit more complicated in that there are hundreds of militias. At times they have fought each other, including those that have been recognized by the UN. And we've seen how there formed alliances. There have been a few regional, sort of within Western Libya, regional rivalries. So, for example, militias in Tripoli have formed alliances to sort of prevent Misratan militias from gaining influence in Tripoli. And we've also seen them form larger alliances. So we saw them form an alliance to take control of Sirte when Sirte was in control by ISIS, and we also saw them more recently form an alliance to sort of repel the attempted attack and the attempt by the LNA to take control of Tripoli. And we've also seen certain individuals and also armed groups try and gain influence within state institutions such as the Central Bank of Libya and the National Oil Corporation. So in parallel to all of this, we've seen things like tribal identity, religious identity, and domestic, economic and political interests. But also, we've seen how the tensions in the Gulf have played out in Libya as well, and the different interests that Turkey and Russia have, the different geopolitical interests that they have in the country and the region as a whole play out. And this has all sort of affected the trajectory of the conflict. We've seen the likes of Turkey and Russia send in mercenaries and military equipment for the sides that they support. So in terms of the change in dynamics in recent years, so in 2019, the LNA launched an offensive to try and take control of Tripoli. And at the time, they also took control of oil fields and oil terminals in Libya, or at least most of them. And eventually, forces in the West, they prevented the LNA from taking control of Tripoli. And what we saw then is a ceasefire agreement signed in October 2020. And soon after that, we saw the lifting of the blockade on oil exports and at the oil production as well. And since then, steps have been taken to implement the different conditions of the ceasefire. But there have been other areas of tension, namely the withdrawal of foreign mercenaries from the country. Those include Russian and those sent by Turkey. And we saw that play out in May of this year when dozens of armed men stormed the Corinthia Hotel, which is one of the meeting places of the Presidential Council. And this is said to have occurred just days after the foreign minister called for all foreign mercenaries to leave the country. And the rival sides have also agreed to work to hold elections in December 2021 of this year. But a constitutional basis for these elections hasn't been agreed yet. And Khalifa Haftar has been accused of obstructing the consensus of the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. And more recently, the US ambassador and special envoy to Libya, he stated that several LPDF members are working to ensure that elections are not held in Libya in December. And all this is really worrying because Khalifa Haftar, he recently stated that if elections are not held in December, then he will launch another offensive to try and take control of Tripoli. So in terms of security threats to oil fields and just the general security situation in Libya, So in January of this year, we've seen the Petroleum Facilities Guard protest at a number of oil terminals in Libya against unpaid wages. But there are suspicions that this is linked to, well, this is sort of a political move by Khalifa Haftar to sort of derail political progress that's been made. And in terms of the general security situation elsewhere, there has been fighting we've seen since the start of the year just west of Tripoli along the coastal road. It hasn't really disrupted operations at the oil terminal in Zawiya. In the Oil Crescent region, things have been a lot more calmer. Again, in comparison to recent years, there hasn't been any major fighting. But in southwestern Libya, the LNA recently launched an operation that they claim is against terrorists and mercenaries, and they launched this operation just days after ISIS carried out an attack north of Sabah. Now, there are suspicions that this operation was launched to sort of escalate military activity and derail or prevent elections from taking place. And in the south, where the largest oil field is also located, the Sharara oil field, there's this group called the Fezan Movement, who recently, they've threatened to sort of block oil production if living conditions don't improve. And this has been a sort of a theme in southern Libya. While living conditions have been poor, across Libya, with fuel shortages, liquidity shortages, electrical shortages, and water shortages, things have been much more worse in southwestern Libya and Sabah in that area. And in the past, we have seen some protests around oil fields. So going forward, we could see fighting. So we could see a relapse in the situation with fighting taking place, between Western forces and the LNA. And in the past, we've seen how fighting has taken place around oil terminals and oil fields. And given the sort of strategic importance, including the economic importance of these sites, of these assets, it is likely that if fighting was to resume again, that fighting will take place around these areas with the different armed groups seeking to take control of these assets. But in terms of the terrorism threat, Al Qaeda and ISIS are known to be active in southern Libya, especially. So the US and the LNA have carried out raids or airstrikes targeting ISIS and Al Qaeda. So recently, we've seen some of these airstrikes or raids taking place in the likes of Sabah and Ubari, which is located just near the Sharara oil field. And while ISIS, who have been the most sort of dominant jihadist group over the past several years, while they're not the force that they once were when they were in control of Sirte, they do retain the capability to carry out attacks, complex or sophisticated attacks. So we've seen complex attacks taking place in Tripoli in recent years, and we just recently saw the suicide vehicle-borne IED attack against a checkpoint north of Sabah. We've also seen, in the past, we've seen multiple reports of ISIS activity around the Huruj Mountains area, which is located in the south of the Oil Crescent region. And years ago, we would see consistent reports of ISIS attacks in a small town called Fukaha, which is located in the western outskirts of the Huruj Mountains. And we've also seen ISIS carry out attacks targeting security checkpoints, LNA checkpoints, in just north of the Huruj Mountains near oil fields.